Thank you once again for being Locked On Cougars and Locked On Texas Tech, your first listen of the day. Jay Catch here. That's Chris Level there. Now, Chris, a year ago in Lubbock, BYU and Texas Tech played an interesting matchup. And with I felt like 10 minutes to go in that game, I actually was watching it. I was here in Utah, obviously watching it from afar. I'm like, all right, BYU's got this in they got in the bag, essentially. It felt like they had it under control. And then all of a sudden, Texas Tech just turned on the afterburners and just blew right past the Cougars in that matchup. And it was one of those losses you kind of looked back at the end of the year and said, what could have been had they held on? Now, BYU ended up in a pretty good spot, all things considered, finishing fifth in the conference. But this is going to be an interesting game because Texas Tech just went and blew the doors off of BYU's hated rival Utah on Saturday night. Kind of looks similar to what happened in Lubbock a year ago to BYU. Where is Grant McCasland's team right now as they come into Provo, Utah tonight?
Yeah, it is interesting going to, because this was my first trip to see Utah basketball. That they have a ways to go. This conference is gonna do mean things to them if they don't step it up quickly. I thought Tech would would play well. They did not play well in their opener against UCF, and they really bounced back. But I wasn't expecting to win by 28 points there in Salt Lake. And I think Utah's team is somewhat similar to BYU. BYU's is a lot more talented, and there's a lot more upside, I think, with BYU's. And I say that as far as similarities in that the way that they've got skill, they're long, they rely on the three, and like Texas Tech does. But I mean, they're BYU was a problem last year. It's been fascinating to see kind of Coach Young put his NBA twist on everything compared to what Coach Pope was doing a year ago when it was just this outside the box offense. You're like, what is this sorcery that we're having to guard? And Texas Tech for about 32 minutes didn't guard it very well last year, and then they obviously played again in Kansas City as well. But yeah, it's I think Grant's team is still figuring out how good they can be. They are, I don't know if either one of these two teams is going to win this league. Okay, so let's just be honest. However, I think both of these two teams are going to fight to be in the top half and certainly for NCAA tournament bids. It's about, because you've been already part of two blowouts.
Yeah.
And like, okay, and what I'll say is, like, which Texas Tech team is going to show up tonight? I don't know. I know what it's going to take, but that's just the way this league is gonna roll. And I am curious how BYU will guard Texas Tech. JT Toppin, low post player, very, very good.
Yeah.
Federico, their backup big, who plays next to him sometimes, has been very good and kind of coming on. And there's a lot of elite shooting out for Texas Tech. But BYU poses a whole different set of problems on that end of the floor. And so maybe it's about who guards the other team a bit better tonight. But tell me about your 6'9" Russian point guard here.
Yegor Demon, that's who you're talking about now. He's a projected lottery pick in the NBA draft, this coming NBA draft cycle. Really impressive athlete, because you mentioned 6'9", true point guard. I actually call him a point forward if you want. But his ability to see the court, Chris, is really, really special. He's been, it's kind of been this chief strength so far this year, just across all the games he's played, is his ability to see the court and set his teammates up in good spots. The major concern right now is his shot is way off. Now, he missed about a month's worth of time with a lower leg injury. He got injured in their first road game of the year. They went back to face Providence in that Big 12 Big East Challenge. He got injured in that game and then sat out until BYU took on Arizona State in the Big 12 opener. And he's looked rusty offensively shooting the ball in the two games since. BYU needs to get him going offensively, because if he can start to hit shots from the outside in particular, that's going to open up a whole lot of things and make him even more dangerous with regards to BYU's offense. The other young man I probably should mention alongside him is another freshman, Cannon Catchings. Funny enough, Catchings has come on strong the last couple of games, where he was a guy who was struggling early on this season in terms of his shot. So it's interesting. They're freshmen. They're 18 years old. Both of them can possible one and done types. It's going to be curious to see how they handle the situation, because BYU got absolutely curb stomped at Houston. Nothing. I mean,
They
nothing.
won't. They won't be alone in that. They have a weight room in downtown Houston, and those guys use it. I mean, it is not you try to run a lot of offense and all this finesse and this and that. They just and the referee, he doesn't puff on that whistle too much in that arena, man. Goodness gracious, but yeah.
And that's the thing about it, is I think Houston showed what the kind of the peak of the powers. When they're shooting threes and making them at the clip they were making them against BYU, that they're going to blow the doors off a lot of teams. And I'm interested to see how BYU responds here, because it's a quick turnaround. The players, Trevin Nell spoke after the game and said they're eager to get back on the court. BYU doesn't practice on Sundays, so they really have only had one true prep day coming into this matchup outside of a shoot around today. And I'm interested to see how they handle this, because players are upset with, I think, their overall performance against Houston. And now that they're back in the Marriott Center, it'll be curious to see how they respond on a quick turnaround in this matchup.
Yeah, and you look at, that's what this league is going to be.
Yeah.
Grant will tell you it's not the team that's going to be the most talented that will win it, and I think right now we would probably all agree that Iowa State's maybe the best team in the league right now. They are a real basketball team. They've got guys that know their roles. They're deep. That's Texas Tech's next home game. It's on Saturday in Lubbock, but it's TJ Otzelberger, I think he's got a great team, but it's going to be which coach can get their guys to play really hard every night.
Yeah.
Because you look at what West Virginia did to Kansas out of the gate. Johnny Dawkins brought his, UCF Knights in, and you kind of tripped up Texas Tech, and you're like, wait, this isn't the way that the season was supposed to start.
Yeah.
And then you get overcorrected, and you go, okay, well, we've got to fix this, and you go out and beat Utah, or you go and Kansas beat that same UCF team by 50. And so it's wild, and who can string them together? Who can string the 3 to 4 to 5 wins together? And it's going to be really difficult, because I just start looking at these schedules on paper, and you're like, where is the breather? Where do you go get right? It just doesn't exist in this league.
No.
Yeah, it doesn't exist in this league. But BYU is an interesting one in that this is a bit, starting true freshman is a bit outside the box compared to what everybody's doing now. Everybody tries to be older,
Yeah.
and more mature and experience and all the stuff, and then you've got these two kids out there that are extremely talented and long and all these things. However, can they handle the rigors of what they'll be put into, and the crowds and all this stuff? And I love basketball season, because it is like 10 straight weeks of a knockdown, drag out fight. And you think you're dead in the water, and then you play 3 days later, and you're like, okay, all the world's right back again. And then you feel, I mean, it's just this constant, because nobody's rolling through this thing. Nobody's going to go, 16-4. That's just not going to exist. I mean, maybe 15-5, wins it, but it makes it a lot of fun, because any given night, man, you never know. But I'm fascinated to see the crowd at the Marriott Center tonight as well. I've heard nothing but great things. Lubbock prides itself on a big time atmosphere at the United Supermarkets Arena, and so I'm curious what the Marriott Center looks like tonight.
The Marriott Center should be near capacity tonight. Students should be, by and large, back in town with the semester starting on Wednesday. So it should be a good crowd. It should be a fun environment. I know that talking with people who went to the game in Lubbock a year ago, they couldn't speak more highly of just the crowd energy down there in Lubbock. They loved Red Raider fans and just the overall environment of that game. So I'm looking forward to it as well. Now, I do have a couple of questions. You mentioned JT Toppin in particular. I'm interested. You mentioned how BYU is going to go about guarding him. We'll delve into some kind of keys to the game coming up next. I want to kind of get your thought on what Tech can do to sweep the Utah road trip that they're on as they come, and they've already beat Utah. If they can sweep it against BYU, or vice versa. How does BYU bounce back after getting absolutely destroyed by Houston? We'll delve into that momentarily on this crossover edition of Locked On Texas Tech and Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Texas Tech your first listen of the day. Jay Catch, Chris Level. Now, Chris, you had an opportunity to see the Huntsman Center, and obviously Texas Tech ran away from Utah on Saturday night. I know here's the thing about BYU and Utah fans. They like to hate watch each other, so there'll be a lot of Utah fans. Now they obviously they face Iowa State tonight. Speaking of the Utes, so they'll have their one eye over there on the Cyclones and playing out there in Ames. But then they'll also be checking out BYU to keep an eye on how things go tonight. You mentioned earlier how BYU is going to go about defending Texas Tech, in particular JT Toppin. And I've looked at Toppin. I've kind of looked at what he does as a player, and I'm very impressed with him. The other guy I am very concerned with is Darian Williams. It just feels like they're a 1-2 tandem it's kind of pick your poison in many respects. Is there anybody else I should be aware of, I guess, from the BYU side, a Cougar fan out there that should be aware of in terms of what the lineup with Texas Tech is? Because Pop Isaacs, as some Cougar fans may not know, is no longer on this roster.
Yeah, Chance McMillan is another guard, and he's averaging. I think he's like 51% 3-point shooter. So you're going to deal with some elite level shooting in this game. I mean, BYU's got a handful of guys that are absolutely gold from deep behind the arc. So let me talk about BYU for a second, because what I see with the Cougs is that this is it's a team with a lot of length and everything, positional size, I would say, and they are what they probably haven't gotten enough credit for is they're an elite rebounding team.
Yeah.
And as they rebound the ball so well, they create extra possessions for themselves. And they are so good with their offense. And you've got multiple facilitators, and you've got at least 3 shooters on the floor at any given time. And that's a problem, especially when they're rebounding. So, because when you would look at the way the team's built on paper, you wouldn't just assume, oh man, I bet these guys are just crushing it on the glass. No, I mean, but that's
Yeah.
but that's the reality of it, right? And when what is also interesting to me is you study this team, they're not really in any close games. The losses they've gotten really it handed to them for the most part. And then the only close game is UC Riverside early on in the season. Everything else is very lopsided one way or the other. And so I don't know how they'll handle being in a close one. Texas Tech, they lost their last close one, obviously at home against UCF. But just as an aside, it was kind of fascinating to see kind of how their game, they're just it's one way or the other.
Well, real quick on that front is BYU. Kevin Young has talked about the fact that he felt like BYU's non-conference schedule was pretty light, and obviously, when you take over as head coach in April, it's hard to go and just completely gut your entire non-conference slate that the previous coaching staff started putting together. He's talked about beefing that up in future years because I think BYU coming into Big 12 play. They ran away from Arizona State in that opener in Provo and got a big win there. But then they went to Houston, and I think that was an eye-opening experience for everybody across the board at BYU. I'm talking about the newcomers and Jaeger Demon and Cannon Catchings, but also vets, guys like Dallin Hall, Fousseyni Traore, Richie Saunders, all guys who have been through this before. They all look like deer in headlights in many respects in that game. And I think that they need some time to get some seasoning here, but they can't wait too long. And I'm with you. I am curious to see how BYU really matches up in a tight affair because you mentioned it's been blowout city one way or the other for the Cougars. You mentioned the rebounding. They've been very good rebounding the basketball until Houston. They got absolutely destroyed on the boards against the Houston Cougars, and Houston made it a point to go out there and really dominate and create those extra possessions for themselves. If BYU can't rebound the basketball against Texas Tech, they're going to find themselves in a world of hurt because, they don't have a lot of positional size in the front court. Keba Keita's their starting center, Chris, and he's 6'8". He makes up for his lack of height with his elite athleticism, but you get him in foul trouble, suddenly BYU's got to deal with Fousseyni Traore, who as their 5-man, who is 6'6". So there's a size issue on the interior, and I am curious to see if BYU can get back to being the elite rebounding team they were before that Houston game, or if there will be a kind of a malaise or a carryover effect of what happened against the Cougars.
Yeah, Houston's typically their offense, just get a shot up on the rim, go get it. Let those big boys just go get it, get people out of the way. It's a problem. The Red Raiders have to deal with the Houston Cougars twice this year, so we'll see how that goes. If I'm Texas Tech, by the way, I on a different podcast before I learned how to say his name, because I had somebody on our trip go, I was like, how do you say this kid's name? If I only just Googled the million places that you could probably hear it, but I was like in a pinch for time, and they were like, it's Igor Demon, and I'm
Well,
like, okay. So in another podcast, I call him Igor Demon, and I'm like, okay, now it's Jaeger Demon.
well,
Oops.
here's the thing though. When he first showed up at BYU, you probably heard every pronunciation that you
Okay,
can
yeah.
imagine under the sun, and it actually took him finally getting on social media and saying, "Everybody, it's Yegor Demon." He literally had to spell it out for everybody. So don't feel bad.
Your roster has some names. I'm gonna struggle tonight on the old radio call. There's some serious names I've got to learn on this deal.
Yeah, so
But
Keba Keita. So I was talking with our good friend Park Ranger from Locked On Cougs, obviously covering Houston and the leader of that game. He asked me on the podcast, this is backstory, pulling back the curtain. He's like, "Okay, Jake, I'm gonna ask you right now. How do you pronounce your center's name?" And he said, "I have it as Keba Keita or something like that." I'm like, "Well, sorry to correct you, Keba Keita." And here's
okay.
the thing: that's in this day and age of basketball, where guys are literally coming from across the globe. It's hard to keep track of it all, and you got to do some work, some leg work to find out how the pronunciations are to be done.
And most of the time, their coaches don't call them by the right name. Because I'm far too guilty of listening to, well, that's how coach said it, so
Yeah.
I'll just go with that. Well, no, a lot of time the coaches don't even know how to say the correct name, all that. But I speaking of Jaeger Dimon, if I'm Texas Tech, I try to turn him into a scorer. I
Yeah.
think his strength is his ability to pass
Mhm.
and facilitate. I think that's when he's at his best and when he's helping his team the most is when he's able to kind of bounce around and kind of get it to those 3-point shooters and all those things. And so now how do you go about that? Now, we'll kind of see, but that would be something I would the rebounding battle is clear. And then to me, this is what was so good about Texas Tech versus Utah.
Mhm.
22 assists to 5 turnovers. They just did a phenomenal job of sharing the ball and
Yeah.
then just taking care of it. And I think part of what gives BYU troubles for other people is when you turn the ball over, BYU is so good in transition,
Mhm.
and so you can't give them that, because what's the 18,000 going to do whenever they get in transition and it equals a three or a dunk or whatever, and you're feeding into your own set of problems. So taking care of the ball, and I don't mean to be Captain Cliche, but because everybody wants to out rebound your opponent and take care of it. But I may make Demon try to beat me scoring it if I can. Maybe easier said than done. But yeah, just the live ball turnovers, man, need to be a low number for Texas Tech.
Well, and here's the thing: if I were scouting BYU, I'd tell Jaeger, show us you can beat us. Like, make him prove it. And if he proves it, you say, hey, props to you, sir.
Yep.
You did it. Now, real quick on the BYU side of things, I'm looking at the Cougars. They didn't shoot the ball well against Houston. They did very well against Arizona State. And obviously, that's a home versus road disparity. That just happens in college basketball. BYU's full, I think their whole goal tonight, trade threes for twos. If they can shoot at a high clip from the three and obviously keep Texas Tech off of the perimeter in terms of shooting and maybe force them to work it inside, and tell JT Toppin and tell the other guys on Texas Tech's front line, if you guys can outscore us trading threes for twos, good on you. That's kind of the way I would approach it if I'm BYU. But I also know that the Cougars, they've got a lot of work to be done with regards to just kind of getting this squad right, because I don't think anybody felt good coming out of that Houston game, because they literally got blown away in every facet. So it'll be interesting to see how they respond in this matchup, Chris.
Yeah, and again, don't get too down about what Houston did to you, because
Well,
they're going to do that to everybody
yeah,
in that building. And they rolled into this league last year in year one and won it. And I think it didn't sit very well with a lot of people, but that's the reality of it. And Kelvin Sampson, man, he's a phenomenal coach, and he's got some toughness about his team. So yeah, I think we still don't know a lot about a lot of these teams because you have no body of work.
yeah,
And until you kind of get 2 or 3 weeks into this, Chris Beard, the former coach, used to say, you can't judge it. You can't really judge your team until the turn.
yeah,
Well, that's 10 games in to this deal, and that's still a long ways away.
yeah.
I think you can judge it before that, but I'm still trying to figure out these Red Raiders, and I think you're probably still trying to figure out these Cougs. But hey, man, this is game three. What is what we got? 17 left of these bad boys after tonight. Goodness gracious.
It's going to be an absolute war of attrition all season long. Just no doubt about
Yes.
that. Well, Chris, as always, it's good to catch up with you, my man. Looking forward to this matchup, obviously. And we will, obviously, I'm sure you'll have a postcast coming up as well. And obviously, plenty of coverage in the coming days as well on Locked On Texas Tech. Where can everybody find your work if you're there a Cougar fan out there that wants to catch you guys?
Yeah, Locked On Texas Tech, man. Me and Casey Cowan are there every day, and we're talking to our fine people like Mr. Hatch. Sometimes on these roundtables, on these Tuesday nights is when we tape these things. They roll on Thursdays, but yeah. So we won't be a part of those
Yeah.
tonight because we got a game to broadcast and watch.
It's true. I already sent my condolences to Drake and company and told him, hey, I'm not going to be there. But nonetheless, looking forward to this. If you want to check out all things BYU, check out Locked On Cougars wherever you get your podcasts, just like Locked On Texas Tech. If you want my thoughts on all things sports, just check out the show Twitter feed or Instagram or Facebook, Locked On Cougars right there. Chris, as always, a pleasure, my man, and look forward to this matchup.
Hey, man, keep hope alive out there. Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me, and enjoyed it, Jake.
We'll do it again soon. All right, that's Chris Level. I'm Jake Hatch. As always, thank you for making Locked On Texas Tech and Locked On Cougars your first listen today. More importantly, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.